And then on February 28th, if you return for our next Lunch and Learn, you'll hear from Radford Jones, who was a Secret Service agent, and he will talk about his service and a little bit of education. So very exciting thing. But today is Valentine's Day, and we are here to learn some interesting history about a century of Valentines from our speaker, Rose Ederer, who is I'm blocking it. I know many of you are familiar with Rose, lifelong Saginaw resident. He has taught in the community, volunteered a lot. She was telling me about her efforts here at the chapel teaching running back in the 80s. So the community is very fortunate to have all of her volunteer efforts, and in addition to that, a prolific writer who has captured a lot of our history, and so that we have that preserved and share. And I'll let you talk about it. She loves to draw her Valentine. So without further ado, because I know we have a century of Valentine to cover, please welcome Rose Ederer.
I can make it up here. Okay, thank you, Jennifer, and thanks for coming. Happy Valentine's Day. I'm thank you so much for coming today. Now, red hearts, pink hearts, all over the place they are, and on everything. Those are the Valentine symbols of today. But those weren't always the Valentine symbols in years past. Okay, at one time, it was the circus, the elephants, street children, umbrellas, rainy days, ships at sea, Christmas cards, and cobwebs. If you believe cobwebs. Okay, you can best see 100 years worth of Valentines, and you can see how Valentines have changed when you look at children's Valentines. Okay, today is going to be a show and a tell. I'm going to tell you how the Valentine originated and I'm going to show you with my own Valentines how the Valentine has changed over 100 years, but yet its original themes have persisted. Now, I have Valentines from 3 generations of my family. I have about 3,000 Valentines, give or take a couple hundred or so. And I have Valentines in every decade over that 100-year time. So I have selected some Valentines from my own collection to show you today. And I think everybody in here will recall some of their childhood decades when you were small and you exchanged Valentines with your classmates. Because that was a fun time. Okay, so Century of Valentines. My oldest Valentine starts from 1903. Now, how did the Valentine history start? Actually, it started with the Roman Empire. Around February the 14th, this is on the spring festival. It was called the Lupercalia, and at that time, the young lads would pull the young maidens' names out of an urn, and they would remain sweethearts for about a whole year until the next spring festival. Okay, that continued until the Middle Ages. Now, at that time, people used to give gifts, which would be gloves and jewelry. And then the Christian church came about, and at that time, there are 2 or 3 Saint Valentines. But the one legend that seems to endure over centuries is the Saint Valentine who was jailed waiting execution. And at that time, he miraculously restored the jailer's blind daughter's vision. And at the day when he was being led off to the guillotine and to be executed, he gave a letter to the jailer, to the daughter, and it said, "From your Valentine." In the 1500s, rhymes were recited from one person when they would give them to their lovers. In the 1600s, they would include hand-drawn cupids with these rhymes. But not everybody knew how to come up with a rhyme, so in 1700s, books of verses were published. And in 1846, Sir Henry Cole invented the Christmas card in England. But the cards were not manufactured until the 1860s. And when they were, they used the English Christmas themes. Now, in 1848 is when the Valentine actually started in America. I'm going to tell you about Esther Howland. She's actually considered the mother of the American Valentine. Now, her father owned a stationery store in Worcester, Massachusetts, and he imported all of his colored papers and their handmade Christmas cards or whatever from England and sold them in his store. Now, Esther had just graduated from college, and she fell in love with those foolish Valentines. And she started making lacy Valentines, samples, or you might call them prototypes. And her brother was a salesman for the father. And he went around with his horse and buggy and took orders for those Valentines. When he came back, he had $5,000 worth of orders. Now think about that in 1848, what that would translate to our money today. And the people that would buy those Valentines were the upper class. They would be paying from $3 to $5 a card. Now, she had so many orders, she could not do this in her home anymore, in her parents' home. She had to move into a factory in Worcester, Massachusetts, and she hired the young girls in town, and the young girls, the working conditions were favorable, they were pleasant, and the pay was good. And so Esther made the work with assembly line. Now, if you thought that Henry Ford came up with the assembly line, you're wrong. It was a woman. And Esther Howland came up with the assembly line. And this is how she made all of her Valentines. They were all handmade. Okay, so every year, her brother went out and he sold the Valentines and he came back with more orders. And her orders actually reached $100,000 per year. Now think about that in the 1800s. How many Valentines that would be when they're only $5 a card? If you know, you want to divide that up. And they had, and all of these young girls in the town were making handmade Valentines. Now, if you can come on to any of Esther Howland's original Valentines, you will have a small fortune. But you will have to buy and sell them by auction. That would be the only way that you could touch those cards. Now, the American history, Louis Sprang came over from Bavaria, Germany in 1856, and he manufactured chromo cards in Roxbury, Massachusetts. He is actually considered the father of the American Christmas card. Okay, in 1890s, cheap German cards arrived. Now, when the German cards came into America, they put the American manufacturers out of business. Now, doesn't that sound familiar today? This is history repeating itself. Okay, so the cheap German cards arrived, and the other thing, 1898, Congress passed a 1-cent postcard, if you can believe that. That was rural free delivery. Now, postcards and mail could be sent out in the country for 1 cent. Because up until this time, it was hard to get mail out there. In the 1890s, now Esther Howland has already been in business at least 40 years, and the German cards are putting her out of business too. So she is selling her company to to the Whitney Manufacturing Company in Worcester, Massachusetts. They are actually the leader of the children's Christmas or Valentine cards. So American companies now begin manufacturing, and they use the English themes. This is a 1903 Valentine, and as you notice, there is a Cupid here on the front, and when you open that up, you will see street people in the circus. This is an elephant. That's a copyright of 1903. The Raphael Tuck was a large manufacturer in London, England, but they also published these cards in America, in New York. Now, as you can see, when we're going through the decades of Valentines, whenever the Valentines were published and printed, they reflected the culture at that time. The culture would be the people, their speech, their dress, their activities, and the transportation. And this is what you would see, and as you go through this, you will see how society has actually changed. Okay, some of these are the cheap German cards. This is a 1910. Now, the cobweb, if you notice, this cobweb is a beautiful, perfect cobweb. You see how it goes circle and circle and circle and all over. The cobweb was quite a Valentine symbol back at that time because the cobweb was a circle of unending love. And as you can see, it went on and on, it got larger and larger. So ladies, when you're knocking down those cobwebs, take a look at them and see if you see those circles. And remember, you're knocking down a lot of love when you knock them down. Okay, here are some more German postcards, 1912. As you can see, there's no red hearts. There's forget-me-nots and birds. Okay, another German postcard. This postcard shows another emblem here. Right here, this emblem was a key to your heart. That was another big symbol at that time. And that was an elite. This is an elite, because I showed you street people before. Now these were the elite people, as you can notice how she is dressed. The street people at that time was taken from Charles Dickens' literature in the 1890s, because Charles Dickens talked about the street people and the ragamuffins, the people down and out. Those are the people, those are the characters that he talked about. And that's what was used in the Valentines and Christmas cards and so forth at that time. Okay, Christmas cards at that time, when cards were published, they could be used interchangeably for different holidays. Now this is a card that was printed and it was mailed on December the 10th, 1910. And when I looked at it, I thought it was a Valentine, but no, it was a Christmas. It was used as a Christmas card. And as you can see, there is a dove here. Okay, and here's another Christmas card that was mailed on the same day. And it shows a Merry Christmas down here. And as you see, the cards were published, and they just changed the greeting on them, and they could be used for different holidays. But their first Valentines were actually had the Christmas card theme to them. The vinegar cards. Now, back in London, England, when people were giving cards and Valentines to each other, they also gave insulting cards or vinegar cards to people that they wanted to get revenge from. And the more insulting, the better. And they send it COD. So that habit persisted a little while in America, but then it ended. And the thing is, the Valentines that are rather raunchy now, they're actually comical, is the way you would look at them. But they were called the vinegar cards. Okay, the Cupid. The Cupid right here, as you notice, has a little dove. Okay, the Cupids actually came from the Greek and the Roman mythology. Okay, Venus was the goddess of love and beauty in Roman, and Cupid was her son. And he would always send a dove as a messenger back to his mother. Okay, in the Greek mythology, Aphrodite was the goddess of love and beauty, and Eros was her son. So this is where the Cupid comes in, way back from the 1600s when they were starting to draw Cupids when they were giving Valentines to each other. Okay, so the verses were quite flowery. I don't know if you can read that or not, but that's the speech at that time in 1910. Now here is a Cupid who is coming down to earth, and he's trying to capture the heart of a mortal. That's what the Cupids were doing. But notice how the Cupids are dressed, and they've got little wings. Okay, now young girls also came out. The young girls goes back to the Kate Greenaway literature in England from the 1890s. This is when you had a lot of young girls, and that was reflected in all of the cards that were manufactured over in England, and that is shown here in the American cards. Now here's another young girl and the lace. Okay, the lace, as you notice around here, would represent clothing, gloves, and so forth at the time when that was given back in the 1500s. And again, here's a fancy writing. I hope you can read that. Okay, the Dutch children came out in 1912. Now notice in the back that they're ships at sea. Can you see my arrow when I show that? Ships at sea. 1912 is the very first time, and that was printed in Germany, and this is probably when diversity first came about. Okay, here's another Dutch children, and as you can see, here's the ships at sea theme. Here's the Dutch boy and girl, and then here's some lace. This would have been a more expensive Valentine, which maybe a serious lover might have given to a fiancé or something like that. But this was a large Valentine. Okay, ships at sea. If you can look real close, here's the ships at sea down here, and here's a big castle. Okay, the ships at sea comes from the United Kingdom because that country was surrounded by water. And anytime somebody left the home in the morning, they always carried an umbrella because either it was raining or there was fog. And everybody in London, England loved the Navy, and they loved the ships at sea. And so this is where, again, when Valentines or Christmas cards were produced back at that time, it showed the culture of the day, and that was one of the things, of ships at sea. And this is something that has persisted for 100 years. Now, young women in lace, this is another one that goes back to the 1890s with the British literature. And again, you can see the lace around here, which would represent clothing. The Whitney Manufacturing Company, they began defining American Valentines, and they introduced the red heart. And they made the Valentines until 1942. They bought out Esther Howland's business in the 1890s. And they were the leading manufacturer of Valentines in America. And they used Esther Howland's designs. Okay, and one thing, in the book that I published, I do have a lot of those Valentines. I can't show you all of them, but I do have a lot of those Valentines, from the Whitney Manufacturing Company. And one thing about them, you always find Whitney Manufacturing Company in the very back of the Valentine. And some of these Valentines are worth $75 a piece. I've seen some of them in the antique stores, and that's what they sell for. If they're in good shape, they're like $75. Okay, now uh, they used the artist Grace Gebby Drayton from 1904 to 1924. She drew for the Campbell Soup and also for cards. If you look at this, these really look like the Campbell Soup kits. And when you look at her, she did not sign her work. But when you look at any of her Valentines, whether you see them in my book or whether you find them in an antique store, you will see that they look exactly like her work. Now, her sister, Margaret Gebby Hayes, wrote the verses for all of those books, for those Valentines. Now, here is one of these Whitney maids, and look at the face on that. That really looks like a Campbell soup, doesn't it? And here's a ship's at sea with a little box. And this is a Esther Howland design. And they used Esther Howland's design. That was like say, a prototype. And then they could use any kind of a inset in there, any kind of a boy or girl, whatever they wanted to. Okay, and then the little Whitney verses, these are what her sister wrote, and they're just sweet little rhyming little verses that you just don't see on Valentine's today. Okay, here's another Whitney made, and her Valentines are usually in the shape of a heart, and they usually are loaded down with red hearts. Here's a Whitney lace, and if you look at that again, here is another. All around here is a Esther Howland, and the little boy in here can be changed to a little girl or whatever. A rainy day theme. This is what you call a mechanical Valentine. There was also a back and a front to this, and you could make it stand up. And any Valentine that could move or that could stand was called a mechanical Valentine. And again, I don't think that this was a Whitney company. I think this was another company because it does not look like the same artist's work on here. Now, this is a mechanical Valentine where you see this heart over here would fold up and would cover that little boy. But it was a Whitney book. Okay, now here is a mechanical Valentine, again, where you would open this up and there's a little girl. See, any Valentines that would move, that wasn't just a plain piece of paper, was considered a mechanical. The newsboy theme. This comes from Charles Dickens' literature, like the Christmas Carol, because he talked about the street people, the ragamuffins, and those were the kids that were out delivering the mail and so forth like this. So this is where the newsboy theme has come from, Charles Dickens. And this has persisted for more than 100 years, as you're going to see when I'm going through these Valentines. Okay, scrap bouquets. These are like little stickum papers, you could call them. 1910s and 1920s. Okay, now here's a dove that would have been, that Cupid would have sent back to his mother. Here's the ships at sea. Now here's the forget-me-nots and so forth. Okay, now here's hands. The hands were a proposal of marriage. And that goes back to the gloves and the clothing back at that time. And again, you see there's no red hearts, but now these scrap bouquets would be stuck onto, if you see the white underneath, this would be like a calling card. The best I could say is like, when kids graduate from high school, they have the little calling cards in their invitations. Okay, and this is what it's like. If you can envision that. This was put on a calling card, and then they gave it to each other. Okay, now this, I did not have any Valentine with an airplane, but whenever any kind of transportation was new, and the common person could not use it. It was just a certain people. Okay, then this was talked about in the Valentines. Now, if you can read that, it says, I wish I had an aeroplane. Look how they spell aeroplane back there, not A-I-R. It says, to take you for a ride. We'd go humming, you and I, skim the clouds and sail the sky. But since I don't, I'll just say, be my Valentine today. So an airplane at that time was something new that not everybody experienced. So they talked about it. Okay, now we move into the 1920s. They're still German made. The British themes are now Americanized, and they begin to reflect the culture realistically. And they are introducing dressed animals doing human activities. This borrows from the British 1890s Christmas cards. Okay, and the current food items, and you see more mechanicals. Now, this is a made in Germany. If you look at that, it says made in Germany here. Here's a Cupid, and this comes out, and there's the paper heart in there. But again, it's got the doves, the Cupid. Okay, this is a 1923. Would you believe this Valentine right here is 100 years old this year? This was in my mother's. After my mother died, I found a whole box where she had Valentines in the 20s and the 30s when she went to school. And anyway, here's where the ships at sea theme. And look at the dress at that time. That Valentine was kind of worn out because look at the creases in it. But that's 100 years old. Now here's a Whitney made, and again it's in the square. But look at the outfit. How people went swimming back in the 1920s. Isn't that about what they did with their bathing suits? And here's the fishing, the ships at sea item. You will find the ships at sea or the rainy days take on the water type themes. This is a mechanical Valentine that would stand up. Now here's the Dutch children, 1920s. And here's the newsboy theme. This was a Whitney company. You can always tell the Whitney companies were made in the form of a Valentine. Here's dressed animals. This was made in the USA. And the little bear is eating his porridge. And there was a cute little verse in there to read like a little book. So this is the front and this was the back. That was also like a mechanical Valentine in the 1920s. Now here's the food themes. Now they're really imaginative. When you look at these, because as I go through, you're going to see, now there's so much imagination right now. Okay, here's children at play. Now notice the hairdos and notice the shoes. I don't know if that's what they wear every day, but notice how they had to improvise, like a broom and so forth. Children at play. Okay, and here's the 1920s. Notice the hairdos, kind of like the grown-ups. I think it shows you the styles and the hairdos, because when the Valentines were published, they represented the culture at the time. And this is one of my favorite Valentines here by the Whitney Company. As you notice that the Valentine hearts around here are both the same for the boy and the girl. This is an example, of a prototype, that Esther Howland had made. And all they had to do was change the colors on here, and then they could have a different looking Valentine. So here the little girl's on the front and the little boy's on the back. It's a really nice Valentine. And children at play. Now notice the little, how they wheeled their little babies around. The real babies were in the wicker buggies. Here's two different styles, and here everybody went out wearing a hat. The children at that time were trying to imitate adults. Okay, these are made in Germany, and you can spot that right away, or at least I can. It says made in Germany here. And these cards, these Valentines, are kind of stiff. And the best way to describe it is, you know what the cardboard in a cereal box would look like? This is how these Valentines were made. They're rather stiff, and they are, now this Valentine here, her little umbrella does move around. It would be a mechanical Valentine. But they're kind of realistic to a point. Okay, now, these are also made in Germany, but they look like little fairy tale people. like Grimm's fairy tale, is my impression when I saw them. But here's a American made. I don't think it's a Whitney. It might be, but anyway, the canoe at the top will come over here, and the little girl's head sticks out. And so you open it up, and you find the little girl in there. That again is a ships at sea theme, and a mechanical. You will find, okay, here's a little spigot in here, and the boy's hand moves up and down, and he's got little red cheeks, but pay particular attention to his shoes. They're trying to make him realistic, but I think that these shoes are Sunday school shoes. I don't think they're everyday shoes. Okay, but American people are trying to make it realistic. Okay, here's a Whitney made. Again, it's a rainy day theme. And here's a German made, and right in here is Germany. Now, there's something about it when you see these German cards, they're stiff and they have little round faces, and again, this just reflects like the automobiles or something that they had at that time. Okay, now we move into the 1930s. There's a Great Depression, little money, and there's an austere style in Valentines, the skimpy lace, the British Christmas theme still exists, the clothing and activities reflect the area more realistically. Now here's the Buzzer Company. That was a big company in America, and this was a card that you put inside of an envelope and you mailed it for 1 cent. And here's another card that you would mail, and notice the cupids and the hearts. Okay, lace in the 1930s. If you've seen birthday cards, Christmas cards, Mother's Day cards, or Valentine's cards, in the 1930s, you will find that they all have that silver tone look to them on the cards, if you have any of those laying around. Okay, and as you notice that there's really no red hearts yet, and the lace becomes skimpy. Okay, now here's a rainy day theme. This would be a children's card, and when you open that up, you see the girl with her doll and the dog. And here's another ships at sea. You can see the ship in the background here. And again, you open that up, and this was the scene inside. Okay, 1930s. Look at the wicker chair that she's sitting in. Look at that dress. Look at that hairdo. I think it's really representative of the 1930s dress and what people used. Okay, this Valentine, that apron, always reminded me of my grandmother. She wore her dress way down to her ankle. And she had an apron just like that tied in the back, and it went way down past her knees. And she wore that all the time, even when she was in her 90s, even when she didn't have to do any more work and take care of kids or babies, she was still wearing aprons like that. And I really think, that this represented, some of the dress back from that time. Now here's the Newsboy theme. That card again was put in an envelope and mailed. Now here's the mechanical card. If you can see over here, you would pull this out, and the girl and the little dog would jump in the car. And then when it comes in and out, that's the mechanical. This is a 1939. This Valentine begins with the Americans' love affair with the convertible. You will see that throughout the century, the convertible. The 1940s, this is after World War II. The Whitney Company is now liquidated. Other companies are now competing. The clothing reflects the era. The British themes exist, and you red hearts on just most everything. And you find careers and role models. This Cupid. Okay, now here's the school theme. Okay, if you notice that little spigot here, and her hand will move up and down. Again, the 1940s were stiff Valentines. They were stiff like they came from the cardboard from cereal boxes. But that's the way teachers sort of dressed back then in the 1940s. And look at the blackboard. Okay, the ships at sea and children. Okay, this again is the mechanical, like his hat bobbed up and down, and then her arm moved again too. Again, that would be the 40s. And notice that. This is how this moved up and down in the snowdrift. But this is the way the kids would have dressed back in the 40s and the 50s with the snowsuits. And this is not really the way you dress today. And here they are skiing again. And that doesn't even look like today's ski outfit, does it? Go back. And this is a spigot on here too, where he would go up and down the hill. Okay, and here's the circus themes again. Again, these were, the circus, was something that everybody went to at the time. Okay, animals, 1940s. Okay, this Valentine was copyrighted 1947. Now, pay attention to this Valentine because this is a soda fountain. And notice the little girl, how she wears a bonnet and the dress. That actually represents the time back in the 40s and the 50s. Females didn't leave the house without wearing a hat. Okay, boys and girls, again, notice the clothing. Babushka. Okay, now you started to see Valentines, say with baby, or look at the baby bunting hat, or say mother or grandmother or father or whatever. Okay, and again, the newsboy theme comes in. Children at play. Now notice this girl's outfit right here. There was a girls' softball team in that era, and they wore outfits just like that. And that was a leading softball team. Okay, then you find careers. Careers are starting, and Cupids, again, those Valentines open up, and Native Americans started coming out too. The 1950s was the most prosperous era in American history. You had the baby boomers. There was an explosion of ideas, things, and activities, and a red heart on every Valentine, and red cheeks on children and animals, and you find musical themes, westerns, and the food takes on human aspects. Now look what's happened to the Cupids. They're now becoming angels, and they're fully dressed. And you see more foreign lands. Anytime there's a war, it just seems like people are traveling the globe more. So you're still seeing the Dutch, and now you're seeing like Switzerland. They're going to more foreign lands. Now here's the ships at sea, and this is a cruise. When you read this in here and see the thing, the ships at sea is a cruise thing. People are now taking cruises. So you can see that is shown in the Valentines. That was the culture at the time. And here's a rainy day. You cannot get away with the rainy day theme. And the circus theme. Notice that how all of the cheeks are all red. Little red cheeks here. And the elephant, he also has a red cheek. But notice that there's red hearts on everything. And you had dressed up animals. And musical themes. Okay, and still you have the British influence. And now here's the food themes. They're taking on human aspects. Like, let's be frank, look at that. Remember the 1920s, they were just there. They were imaginative. But now there's another imaginative. Look at the bean on here. What does that say? I bean something. Okay, westerns. Remember that there were a lot of westerns on the TVs back in the 1950s. Okay, the rodeos and Gene Autry and all of this stuff. And down on the farm. And back in the 1950s, much of the country was still a rural farming country. And so children could identify with this. And so so that was shown in the Valentines. And school themes. School was very important. Now, in the 1950s, there were a lot of one-room country schools. And unless you lived in the city and you were out any place outside of the city limits, you were in the country and you went to a one-room country school. I went to a one-room country school for 7 years. And I know that we love Valentine's Day and we celebrated Valentine's Day. And school was very important in those one-room country schools. Okay, now here's children at play, the 1950s. Now notice her hairdo. Now it's starting to be more realistic as to how the children are dressed. And then the children at play. Notice, okay, they're doing roller skating. Notice the hairdos and the dresses and so forth. Okay, and now look at the dowel buggy. That's changed from the one in the 1920s. And that is more like what you would put a real baby in the dowel buggy, isn't it? And here's the boys. Okay, they're starting to do more activities. Boys' careers, doctor and policeman. And fireman. And girls. Okay, girls couldn't do everything back then in the 50s, but you were nurses, homemakers, or probably telephone operators. And look at the black telephones. And back then, there weren't any cell phones, so you had phone booths all over. Okay, new fashions. Now, this is really something from the 50s. Saddle shoes and slacks. Now, they weren't called jeans, but let me tell you this. If you went to school wearing slacks, or you went to church or any place with slacks, you were sent home. You weren't allowed in there. So slacks were starting to make a comeback, but in the 1950s, you did not see any Valentines with little girls wearing slacks. Now, this is probably more realistic of a boy. Okay, then you find the newsboy theme. And here is, again, the newsboy theme. And let me tell you, when I looked at these Valentines like 30 years later, and I looked at that and I thought, you know what? This is just the way I went to school, with my hair parted, ribbons, and matching stockings and everything. And that's the way most of the girls went to school back then. You wore hair ribbons, and of course the boys had long pants at that time, but the tops, the shirts would have been alike. But actually, when you look at those Valentines, they really reflect the clothing of the time. Okay, now here's transportation. Not everybody could go up in a plane, in a helicopter, or could parachute down. And here's the love affair with the convertible. And here, airplanes. Now people are starting to take airplane trips. This would be the late 50s, and race cars. Okay, then we move into the 1960s. It was innocent at the beginning. Then there was a conflict by the end with the Vietnam War, and you had hippies and the cults. You had changing society, deteriorating values. 1962 was the first space mission. 69, they landed on the moon, and the Valentines had the silver fleck. Now, notice the cupids on here. They're not, I don't know if they're angels. This one looks like an angel. But cupids are definitely changing. Okay, and these Valentines here, as you can see, this is a ships at sea type thing. Again, here's another newsboy theme with the silver. Okay, and here's the cupids and the circus. And the Valentine, the circus themes. The reason there's so many teacher on here is because my sister was an elementary teacher and principal for 40 years. And the children they celebrated Valentine's Day out in the country. And the children always gave her Valentines. She never threw them out. And so she saved them for 40 years. And she used to make posters or bulletin boards every year for the kids with the Valentines. That's why she saved them. And I didn't know she had saved them. But that's where I got all these Valentines. Okay, and anyway, here's the animals doing human activities. Now, you had musical themes, and the Dutch and Native American children are still around. The school themes. Notice how that teacher is dressed. The high heels. Notice those eyeglasses and the style. The teachers do not dress like that today. And this is the way the kids sat in school. The school the teachers or the schoolrooms do not look like that today either. Now here's the one-room country school, and in 1965 is when the one-room schools were outlawed in Michigan, and they had to consolidate together. So all of the one-room schools consolidated to make one large district, and that's when the one-room country schools disappeared all over. Okay, now the children in 1968, now notice their dress. Okay, and this boy, he's got blue jeans and he's riding a speed bike. That's more reflective of the culture at that time. Okay, now even this girl, the girl and the boy are both wearing jeans, but I don't think they were allowed in school with those jeans at that time. Okay, and now you have transportation and space. Everybody is going in, well, not everybody, just astronauts are going up into space, not everybody, and so you will find that in the Valentines. The 1970s, there's mod colors and different artwork. The children are portrayed as teenagers. You have integration in the civil rights. Both parents are working, and it's the fast foods, and material things are now substituted. And you see Snoopy, Ronald McDonald, and Walt Disney. And you see TV shows and characters. Now here are the Cupids and the angels. Now notice how small these Valentines are, because when I scanned them, I could get 2 of them here at a time. And again, the ships at sea theme is still hanging around. And here's the newsboy themes. But notice the artwork on this. And the circus themes. Okay, musical themes in the school. Now look at how these Valentines have shriveled right now. And school doesn't seem to be quite as important anymore. And the Dutch theme is still around. And now you have foreign cultures. Well, that would be up in Alaska and Africa. Okay, boys' careers, still a doctor and a fireman. Now the girls are now going in the offices. Notice the mini skirts and notice the bouffant hairdo. And in addition, she's still a nurse, but now the careers are opening for the girls. Okay, and these 2 Valentines look like they came out of the same packet, because children you could buy a Valentine packet of 32, 35 Valentines. And they are starting to show people of color now in the Valentines, with integration. Okay, here's boys in 1970 playing the football. It's getting more realistic. And notice this little boy from the 1920s. He's going with his baseball bat, but notice his shoes. It's more realistic. And the girls, notice her hairdo, and she's wearing stirrups. Wasn't that a fashion thing back then in the 1970s? Maybe some of you wore that even. Okay, now here's the girls' integration. They're showing both races on a Valentine that probably come from that same packet of Valentines I showed you. And those glasses, those are really something in the 1970s too. Glasses, the frames changed too. Okay, now here's the animals. Again, they're so small you can do 3 of them at a time. Now Snoopy is coming about. Snoopy came out 1978 in the zoo animals. Anytime something came out, any cartoon or any movie, you saw that in the Valentine. Of course, that would be copyrighted, by Walt Disney or whatever. Okay, and here's Ronald McDonald. And here's what the food themes are. Okay, and Walt Disney. Now notice, this is still a ships at the sea. This would be a careers, and this would be a transportation. And when you look at that, the Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, they're all doing things with these themes. The characters are borrowed from the movies, but the themes are still around. Now here's the outer space. Now notice that outer space, In the 1970s, it's getting deeper and deeper or further and further. Okay, 1980s, you get smaller, thinner Valentines. The food items are like advertisements. And you have Garfield and Peanuts. And then cartoons and movies fill the leisure time. And you have computer and technology age. And women are now traveling in outer space. And you have less imagination in Valentine's. Okay, here's the Cupids and the Angels. I was really hard pressed to look through those 1980s Valentines to find any that were okay. And now here's 1986. Here's the Dutch children. Here's the school themes. Here's the newsboy. And here's the ships at sea. Here's fishing in rainy days. Here's the circus again. And the circus. And look at the food themes. Okay, farm animals. And how the animals are dressed up doing human activities. Again, that borrows from the British. And then Garfield came about, 1985. Cracker Jacks. Okay, cartoons. And now Strawberry Shortcake. Take a note of this, of how she's dressed, how her shoes are, and how her bonnet, because she's going to arrive again. The movies. Okay, anytime there's a Wizard of Oz and Mickey Mouse, okay, musical themes. Anytime something came out and was very popular, you saw Valentine's. So you see a lot of foreign cultures again. And here's the boys at play. Now you have bowling balls in there. And the girls at play. And boys and girls. Here they are at a soda fountain. And notice how they are dressed now compared to what they were back in 47. And boys' careers, firemen, girls are now artists and chefs. And then you have the calculators come. That's the beginning of the computers, wasn't it? Outer space. Okay, women are now going up in outer space too, as you see the boy and the girl going up. Wasn't that the very first one that went? Okay, transportation. The 1990s, you see lack of imagination, innocence, small trading cards, Barbie and Ken introduce sports, blockbuster, sophisticated teenagers, computer cards. Okay, here's the school themes. They're getting smaller and smaller. The circus themes. And the food themes. Now, all of these Valentines in the 1990s would fold together and you would write the kids' names on the back. Both of these, okay, these are the Barbies. Here's the sports. And the movies. 101 Dalmatians was quite a hit back at that time. Okay, and the fairy tales always were around. The animals. And animals again, and then Cupid. I was really hard-fetched to find a Cupid in the 1990s, but look what has happened to the Cupid. Okay, and the cartoons, they're always around. Okay, and the ships at sea, notice all of this. Okay, and the boys and the girls, they seem so sophisticated, like they've grown up. And then yet, here's some little kids. And they had suckers attached to these. Skateboards, and the boys and girls again. Here's transportation, outer space, again. And then computer cards. People are making their own cards, aren't they? Okay, the 2000s. Now you're giving gifts, candy, balloons, and flowers are given in lieu of cards. School classes don't have parties anymore, and that's unfortunate. And there's more commercialism, and you see Harry Potter, Bob the Builder, Powerpuff Girls, Barbie, and movies. Okay, so here's Dr. Seuss and Pokemon. Here's your sports again, and here's your animals. Okay, and here's the Harry Potter. Now this, with the owl on the bottom, is the back of that card. You say who it's from and write who it's to. And you write that to and you fold it up. That's how big those Valentines are. Okay, and same thing with Winnie the Pooh. Here's what's on the back of the card. Okay, and Strawberry Shortcake. Notice how she's gotten modern. Look at her outfit, her bonnet, her shoes. But she's still around in 2003. She was introduced in 1981. Okay, Hello Kitty was now Walt Disney, the Powerpuff Girls, and Barbie. And then Bob the Builder. As you notice, women are now getting equal jobs, not so much equal pay, but here she is with her earrings and such, and she's doing the same job as a man. Now that came about in the 2000s. Okay, here's Winnie the Pooh again. Now here's the Wild Things. Again, here's kids. Okay, now SpongeBob SquarePants. The second and third graders really like that. You know, I'm a read mentor, and I know that the kids just love that book. And look how you have the ships at sea type of thing. Valentine, I'm bubbles over you and so far. Okay, and here again, I see the best celebrate. You know, it's still around. Now here's 2017. These are adult Valentines, and I'm just showing you some of the others. And here again, you have Cupid sending that messenger up to his mother. And again, this, Happy Valentine's Day. And now, American Century, you just turn back the pages and you look at how the American culture has changed over the decades through clothing styles, artwork, language, daily activities, and end. Now, what will future Valentines be? Now, have you looked at the Valentines in the store now? They look like the children's Valentines. They're tattoos. Tattoos are showing what's the tattoos are really part of the culture nowadays too. Now I have written a book, a 50-year history of the Valentine. I'm going to have a special price for $5 a book if anybody is interested in these books today. So I got my...
That was very fascinating, right?
So,
I definitely saw a few Valentines that looked familiar from my childhood.
yeah, I think everybody can think about when you were a kid and think about that era and think, oh yeah, those were the kind of Valentines I had, you know. So thanks for not falling asleep on me.